Hi, fifth graders. Welcome to Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is over division with decimals. Today, our decimal division lesson is Division Patterns with Decimals, Lesson 5.1. I am on page 291 in our textbooks. The standard we are looking at today is in Number and Operations in Base 10, 5.2. This standard says, I can explain patterns in the number of zeros of the product when multiplying by powers of 10. I can explain the placement of the decimal point when a decimal is multiplied or divided by a power of 10. I can use whole number exponents to denote powers of 10. So as you can tell on page 291 in our textbooks, we are going to be dividing by powers of 10 today. And our essential question is asking, how can patterns help you place the decimal point in a quotient? So under the unlock the problem, it says the Healthy Wheat Bakery uses 560 pounds of flour to make 1,000 loaves of bread. Each loaf contains the same amount of flour. How many pounds of flour does the bakery use in each loaf of bread? So we know that we can use powers of 10 to help us find our quotients. And dividing by a power of the 10 is same as multiplying by 1/10, 1/100th, or 1,000th. So back in chapter 4, when we did lesson 4.1, we multiplied by increasing and decreasing powers of 10. Our increasing powers of 10 were multiplying by 10, 100, and 1,000. And when we multiplied by our decreasing powers of 10, it was multiplying by 1/10, 100th, or 1,000th, which is essentially dividing by 10, 100, or 1,000. So we do need to underline the sentence that tells you what we are trying to find, and that's at the very end of the question. They are asking us to find how many pounds of flour does the bakery use in each loaf of bread. And I know in order to find this answer, I am going to need to use the 560 pounds of flour and that they are making 1,000 loaves of bread with that flour. So one way to solve this is to use our place value patterns. So we know we have to take our 560 divided by 1,000, and they are showing this in two different ways. They're showing you by multiplying by the decreasing powers of 10 with 1/10, 100th, and 1,000th. And then they're showing you how you're dividing by your 10, 100, and 1,000, and how both of them would give you the exact same answer. So back in chapter 4, we did learn that anytime we were multiplying by 1/10, we were taking one swoop to the left because it's a decreasing problem. We need to make our number smaller. So showing the one swoop to the left, you see that it was 56.0. Multiplying the 560 by 100th, again, two decimal place values for 100th. So from the end of the number, swoop 2 to the left, which gave you 5 60/100ths. And then finally, if you're multiplying by 1,000th, it would be 3 swoops to the left because there are 3 digits behind the decimal and the 1,000th decimal. So when they did that, they swooped the decimal from the end of the 560 3 places to the left to get 560 thousandths. So that's essentially the exact same thing that you're doing when you're dividing by powers of 10. So when I take 560 divided by 1, that's obviously 560. 560 divided by 10, my 10 has 1 0 in it, so that does tell me to swoop once to the left. All dividing powers of 10 are swooping to the left. So when I take 560 divided by 100, 2 zeros in 100, so I had 2 swoops to the left to again get that 5.60. And then 560 divided by 1,000, 3 zeros are in 1,000, so therefore 3 swoops to the left to get your 0.560. So when you go to write your answer, remember we do not have to have the 0 at the end. Those zeros do not change the value. So you could just say that there are 56/100ths pound of flour used in each loaf of bread. Now obviously if you did keep the 0, it would not change your answer or the value. you could go with either answer. So moving on to question number 1. As you divide by increasing powers of 10, how does the position of the decimal point change in the quotients? Well, if I look back up at that pattern, I had my increasing powers of 10 that I was dividing by over here. And notice, as I divided by each increasing power of 10, the decimal point moved one place to the left for each increasing power of 10. So we can just state that the decimal moves to the left. So when I move on now, another way is to use exponents as we are working through our powers of 10 and division. So still the exact same whole number, 560, but this time they are showing the increasing powers of 10 as our exponent with, or our base with our exponent. So I have my 10 to the 0, 10 to the first, 10 to the second, and 10 to the third. Now remember from chapter 1 and then again in chapter 4, when you work with powers of 10 and exponents, the exponent is telling you how many swoops to do. So 560.
Please excuse the interruption, but on the visitor parking lot, there is a white van.
So 560 divided by 10 to the 0 power. The 0 does tell me to keep my decimal in the same spot that it is currently located. So therefore, that would stay at 560. So then when I divide 560 by 10 to the first power, we do have one swoop that we have to go to the left according to my exponent. So that again is how I get 56.0. 560 divided by 10 to the second power, this 2, as the exponent does tell me to swoop 2 places to the left. And then 560 divided by 10 to the third power, the exponent of 3 does tell me to swoop 3 places to the left. So from the end of my whole number, swooping 3 to the left again does put my decimal in front of the 5. So you could keep the 0 at the end or you can drop it off. Either way, your answer would still remain the same. So for question number 2, each divisor or power of 10 is 10 times the divisor before it. How do the quotients compare? So we know that each quotient is 1/10 of the quotient before it. All right, so now moving on to the next page, it says under the connects, dividing by 10 is the same as multiplying by 1/10 or finding 1/10 of a number. So my next example says Lang used 25 5/10 pounds of tomatoes to make a large batch of salsa. He used 1/10, I'm going to underline that, 1/10 as many pounds of onions as pounds of tomatoes. He used 1/100 as many pounds of green peppers as pounds of tomatoes. How many pounds of each ingredient did Lang use? So remember, if we have the number of pounds of tomatoes, which is 25 5/10 pounds, and they say for the pounds of onions, it is 1/10 of that, multiplying by 1/10 is the same as dividing by 10. So I, to find the onions, have to take 25 5/10 and divide it by 10. So if I fill in the pattern, I know any number divided by 1 always equals that exact same number. And now any number divided by 10, my 10 is 1 0, so 1 swoop. And recall from the previous page, when you divide, you have to swoop to the left. So from my decimal, I'm going to swoop one place value to the left. So now I have 2 and 55 hundredths. So I know that Lang would use 2 and 55 hundredths pounds of onions. Now for the green peppers, remember it says for the green peppers he used 1/100th as many pounds of green peppers as pounds of tomatoes. So for our pounds of tomatoes, it was 25 and 5/10, and if I want 1/100th of that, that is it taking 25 and 5/10 divided by 100. So to fill in my pattern, all the front numbers would be our 25 and 5/10. And then I divide by 1, which gives me that exact same number, divided by 10, 1 0 in my 10, so 1 swoop to the left, places my decimal in between the 2 and the 5. And then if I divide by 100, my 100 has 2 zeros in it, so therefore I have to do 2 swoops to the left, and we would have 255 thousandths. So I know that he would need 255 thousandths pounds of green, or pound I should say, of green peppers. So remember, anytime you divide with our increasing powers of 10, you are swooping to the left. And the 0 or the exponent tells you how many times to swoop. So under the try this, for A, we have a pattern that they want us to complete. So any number divided by 1, we always know equals that exact same number, so I still have 32.6. Divided by 10, my 10 has 1 0, so 1 swoop. Since we're dividing, it's to the left, and it's always from the decimal. So once to the left does place my decimal in between the 3 and the 2. And then divide that by 100. My 100 has 2 zeros. Since we're dividing, it's to the left, and from the decimal it swoops into the beginning of the number, so in front of the 3. So 326 thousandths. For B, notice we have our powers of 10 with our exponents. So the exponent is what is telling us how many swoops to do. So because my exponent is a 0, I do not swoop at all, so I'm left with my 50 and 2/10. Now if I divide by 10 to the first, my exponent of 1 tells me 1 swoop. Since it's dividing, it's to the left, and it's always from my decimal. So that does place my decimal in between the 5 and the 0. And then finally, divided by 10 to the second power, my exponent of 2 tells me 2 swoops. It's always to the left when I divide, and it's from the decimal. So I am left with 502 thousandths. So notice as you complete your patterns, especially in question number 1 under the share and show, the decimal is moving one place value to the left each time you do an extra swoop, and that is showing that the number is going 1/10 of the previous number. So for question number 1, the dividend is being divided by an increasing power of 10, so the decimal point will move to the left one place for each increasing power of 10. So as they filled in the pattern, they did swoop once to the left for each increasing power of 10. So to go down to the 10 to the third power, the exponent of 3 tells me 3 swoops. All whole numbers do have their decimal at the very end, so I do have to swoop from the very end, and it's again to the left. So for the final question, it does have us placing the decimal in front of the 4 for 456 thousandths. Moving on to page 293, completing these patterns. So I do again have my exponents to denote my increasing powers of 10. So for all of these, I will swoop to the left because they're dividing, And for any whole number, I swoop from the end. So if you want to go ahead and place that decimal at the end of your whole number, just to remind yourself where you start your swoops, you can do that. Now obviously for 225 divided by 10 to the 0 power, that stays at 225, so you don't have to swoop anything. Now divided by 10 to the first power, that exponent of 1 tells me 1 swoop, and I'm going to the left from the end of my whole number, so I'm left with 22 and 5/10. Divided that by 10 to the second power, the exponent of 2 tells me 2 swoops to the left from the end of my number to get 2 and 25 hundredths. And finally, divided by 10 to the third power, the exponent of 3 tells me 3 swoops to the left from the end of my number, so I have 225 thousandths. Moving on to number 3. Number 3 is exactly like what we just did for number 2. Again, all whole numbers, so we are swooping from the end of the number again, and our exponent is telling us how many to swoop. So divided by 10 to the 0 power leaves my number at 605. Divided by 10 to the first power, swoop once, and that is to the left from the end of my whole number, so 60 and 5/10. Divided by 10 to the second power, I have to swoop 2 times to the left from the end of my whole number, so 1, 2, places my decimal in between the 6 and the 0 for 6 and 5 hundredths. Finally, divided by 10 to the third power, I have 3 swoops to the left from the end of my whole number, 1, 2, 3, gives me 605 thousandths. For number 4, they are just showing divided by 1, 10, and 100. Remember, it's the zeros that tell us how many times to swoop. So divided by 1 keeps me with 74 and 3/10. Divided by 10, there's 1 0, so 1 swoop to the left from my decimal, so that places the decimal in between the 7 and the 4 for 7 and 43 hundredths. And then divided by 100, I have 2 zeros in 100, so 2 swoops to the left from the decimal, and that gives me 743 thousandths. Under the on your own, if you would like to pause at this point, answer questions 5 through 10, and then make sure you then start playing your video again to check your answers with my answers. So for question number 5, I have 156 divided by 1, which is 156. Divided by 10, there's 1 0. Since it's a whole number, I start from the end, and I have to swoop to the left. That gives me 15 and 6/10. Divided by 100, I have 2 zeros, so 2 swoops to the left from the end of my whole number gives me 1 and 56 hundredths. And then finally, divided by 1,000, it's 3 swoops to the left because there are 3 zeros from the end of my whole number, and that would give me 156 thousandths. For question number 6, 32 divided by 1 is 32. 32 divided by 10, swooping once to the left, gives me 3 and 2/10. Divided by 100, swooping 2 times to the left, gives me 32 hundredths. And now, dividing by 1,000, notice there are 3 zeros. I do have to do 3 swoops to the left. I do have a decimal, or a swoop, I'm sorry, with nothing there. So for this one, I do have to add a 0 into my decimal place value for the 10th digit to keep the 2 in the thousandths place for 32 thousandths. So for a few of these, we will have to add those zeros into those empty swoops. Number 7, 23 divided by 10 to the 0 power is 23. Divided by 10 to the first power, 1 swoop to the left for 2 and 3/10. Divided by 10 to the second power is 2 swoops to the left for 23 hundredths. and divided by 10 to the third power, that again is 3 swoops to the left, a swoop that has nothing there, so therefore I do have to add a 0, so 23 thousandths. Question number 8, 12 and 7/10 divided by 1 is 12 and 7/10. Divided that by 10, 1 swoop to the left is 1 and 27 hundredths, and divided by 100 is 2 swoops to the left for 127 thousandths. Number 9, divided by 10 to the 0 power, it leaves it at 92 and 5/10. Divided by 10 to the first power, 1 to the left is 9 and 25 hundredths. Divided by 10 to the second power, 2 swoops to the left, and that gives us 925 thousandths. For question number 10, 86 and 3/10 divided by 10 to the 0 power leaves me with 86 and 3/10. Divided by 10 to the first power is 1 swoop to the left from my decimal, so 8 and 63 hundredths. And divided by 10 to the second power is 2 swoops to the left from my decimal, and that gives me 863 thousandths. So now I am going to move on to the very last page, and I'm going to go down to question number 19, because when we do take our quiz over chapter 5, you do have a question that is very similar to this, so I do want to make sure that you understand what you would be doing. It does say for number 19, use the numbers on the tiles to complete each number sentence. So if you would see this question on Schoology, this would be a drag and drop where the tiles, you would need to place them in the appropriate location in order to get this final answer. So for this problem, it says 62 and 4/10 divided by 10 to the 0 power. We know that that would leave us with 62 and 4/10. So you would drag those tiles to create that number. Then for dividing that by 10 to the first power, my exponent of 1 tells me 1 swoop to the left from the decimal. So you would have 6 and 24 hundredths. And finally, you would have that divided by 10 to the second power. So 2 swoops to the left does place my decimal in front of the 6. So 624 thousandths. So for this question on a test or a quiz, you would have blank tile or blank spaces that you would drag those tiles into for those answers. All right, moving on to the homework. So the homework is on page 295 and 296. On the front of this, on page 295, you are going to complete the even questions except for number 12. So that means 2, 4, 6, 8, and number 10. So for 2, 4, 6, and 8, those are going to be an all or nothing type of problem. You will have to get every single blank filled in correctly to get the credit for those 4 problems. For question number 10, it says the local cafe uses 510 cups of mixed vegetables to make 1,000 quarts of beef barley soup. Each quart of soup contains the same amount of vegetables. How many cups of vegetables are in each quart of soup? So we need to take the total number of cups of mixed vegetables there are, which is 510 cups, and we need to divide it by the number of quarts they are making, which is 1,000. So when you do 510 divided by 1,000, that will give you how many cups of vegetables in each quart of soup. Now moving on to the back, which is 296. We are not doing all of the back, so make sure you pay attention to the questions that we are doing. We will do questions 1 and 2. For question number 1, it says the Statue of Liberty is 305 and 5/10 feet tall from the foundation to its pedestal, to the top of its torch. Isla is building a model of the statue. the model will be 1/100th times as tall as the actual statue. How tall will the model be? So we know that the Statue of Liberty is 305 and 5/10 feet tall. If her model is going to be 1/100th times as tall as that, I know that I could multiply it by 1/100th, or making it a lot easier for me to understand, I can divide that by 100. Remember, multiplying by 1/100th is the same thing as dividing by 100. So swoop your decimal, the number of place values you need to, and that would give you how tall her scale is. For question number 2, Sue's teacher asked her to find 42 and 6/10 divided by 10 to the second power. How many places and in which direction should Sue move the decimal point to get the correct quotient? So I know that I'm going to have to fill in the blank number of places. So how many swoops to the, and then in which direction will she have to swoop? So again, the first blank is how many swoops you have to do, and the second blank is the direction in which the swoops have to be going. You will do questions 3 and 4. So for question number 3, in the number 956,783,529, how does the value of the digit 5 in the 10 millionths place compare to the digit 5 in the hundredths place? So I'm looking at the 5 in the 10 millionths place, which I know would give me a value of 50 million. And then I'm comparing that to the value of the 5 in the hundredths place. And I know that the value of the 5 in the hundredths place is 500. Now I'm purposefully lining my two values up the way I did because I want the 5 and as many zeros lined up as possible. Because now what I'm going to do is I'm going to place a box around everything that is the same. Now to figure out how many times larger the 50 million is compared to the 500, I know that I would just place a 1 in front of the zeros that are outside of the box, and that will tell me how many times bigger. So it will be blank times as much as. Now, if you can't figure that out, another way to solve this is by taking your 50 million and dividing it by 500. That's the other way that you can solve this question. All right, moving on to number 4. Taylor has $97.23 in her checking account. She uses her debit card to spend $29.74, and then she deposits $118.08 into her account. What is Taylor's new balance? So I have to start with the amount that she has in her account, and if she is using her debit card to spend money, that means she no longer has that money in her checking account. So I have to subtract the $29.74. Then it says she deposits $118.08 into her account. Remember, depositing money means you are putting more money into the account, so you are increasing your balance. So therefore, you will have to add $118.08 plus whatever you found when you subtracted the first time. Now for question number 5, we are going to cross off. We are not completing that question today for our homework. And finally, for question number 6, you will be doing this problem. It says a commercial jetliner has 245 passenger seats. The seats are arranged in 49 equal rows. How many seats are in each row? So because I know the total and I know how many rows there are, I am going to take the total number of seats. Oops, it should be a 5. I'm going to take the total number of seats, and I'm going to divide it by the number of rows there are. And that should not give you a remainder as you do your division problem. So you should be able to figure out from there how many seats per row. Please let us know if you have any questions. I hope you found this lesson easy.